yeah, you blew her quicker than you blew me. I was like, sir, just say that you're Debus. That bread's stinky. Like, I just know. Stan, Susan, and Jadis for clear skin. This is a scream and cry for help. My ancestors are quaking. I don't know if I should cry or laugh. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Mel, and today we're gonna be doing something that both intimidates and intrigues me, which is why we're doing this in the first place. However, just for backstory, my friends and I a few weeks ago were literally watching Narnia, the first movie. And one of my friends then also, a few days later, texted me, and one of her texts literally said, Daddy Aslan. And I took both of those things as a sign, because the very first book I ever read was Narnia. And do I remember any of it? No, I was much too young. What a perfect way to bring you guys a video project, a video experiment. I'm gonna be reading the entirety of the Narnia series. I am so very intrigued by this series and how polarizing really it is on booktube and how many people express their outward distaste for the series. And so I thought that this would be a perfect series to read and break down and experience. And obviously this will be spoiler filled because it's Narnia. It's been around for a while. The most exciting part of all of this was that I of course had to text who I consider to be the king of full series vlogs, which is Gav. And then I convinced him to do this with me. Coincidentally enough too, he had already bought a copy and he was also planning this video, so we're just expediting this. Does anybody even care that I'm reading Narnia? Do you care? Let me know that in the comments, but I'm reading Narnia. And we'll see how this goes. I finished The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and this actually went better than I was expecting. I was a little bit scared going into this because I was like, listen, if the first book right off the bat is not an enjoyable experience, I know I will struggle even though the books are short. And Gav and I decided to go in publication order. And so I'm glad that we started out with this because this actually went pretty well. I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. I think it was a really good place to start with the series where you can very much tell that the voice behind this is very, very fairy tale-y. It's very whimsical. And because it's a children's book, it's not long-winded. It's very succinct. He was very, very gifted at writing characters' voices. I found that all of these characters had such distinctive voices, and I think also the way they express themselves is very differently from one another. To add to that also, all of the characters from Narnia obviously sound different from the humans. And I also really, really liked that when at the end of the book, before they come back out of the wardrobe, when we see Lucy, Edmund, Peter, and Susan, when they're adults and they've been kings and queens for a really long time, we see their voices change. Not only are they obviously more mature because they've been living in Narnia for a really long time and they have been ruling. And so I think the voice not only reflected that grace that royals have, but it also was very different from the way they spoke when they barely knew anything about Narnia. Because at the end, they become more Narnian than they do behave like regular humans. And so that part I very much enjoyed. Future Mel interjecting here because I just realized as I was editing this video that I never gave a synopsis for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And some would argue that this doesn't merit a synopsis because everybody and their mother knows what this is about. However, for consistency's sake, because every other book has a synopsis, I feel obliged to provide a synopsis for this too. So, for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we follow the Pevensey siblings who have been shipped off to a professor's house. Lucy, who is the youngest sibling, ends up finding a wardrobe at the professor's house, and she enters said wardrobe and she finds a super magical and mystical land, obviously by the name of Narnia. She ends up meeting one Mr. Tumnus, who is a kidnapper, quite literally, for Jadis. Jadis, who is the supposed queen of Narnia, also known as the White Witch, and he changes his mind halfway through their interaction over tea and biscuits and all the things, where he decides to not turn her over, although although that is her mandate as queen, to deliver to her any boys or girls that these creatures encounter. Jadis has also placed an eternal curse on Narnia for it to forever be winter and never reach Christmas and the turning tide of Christmas into spring and a new season. Lucy comes out of the wardrobe. She thinks it's been ages because of how long she was over at Narnia, and she finds out that it was literally only seconds ever since she went into the wardrobe. Then one day Edmund ends up following her into the wardrobe. He interacts with Jadis and she gives him Turkish delights, and she promises that if he brings over his siblings, she will give him all the Turkish delights he wants and he will reign beside her. And because Edmund is a fucking brat, he goes, bet I will bring my siblings and you can imprison them because they are indeed lesser than me. And so eventually all of the Pevensies make it into Narnia. They encounter the beavers, and the beavers basically tell them that they need to go meet Aslan because Aslan is the one that is going to guide them into the right path and basically right all of the wrongs in this world. Edmund is over there imprisoned with the White Witch because he separates himself from his family because he's like, I just want them Turkish delights and I want to be king, so all things will be fine. I don't care about my siblings, and neither will Jadis, except that she does. They basically meet up Aslan. It becomes a whole thing. We know that Aslan sacrifices himself for Edmund, and so instead of killing Edmund, Jadis kills Aslan in his stead, which is just an entire parallel to the crucifixion. There's that, and then Aslan comes back to life. They head into war, kills Jadis, and the war is literally a page long. They're all crowned kings and queens of Narnia, and they stay there for their entire lives up until they walk out of the wardrobe. And that's what happened in this episode of the Chronicles of Narnia. I will say the beavers remain my favorite characters, and I have this very clear mental image too about all of these siblings finding the beavers for the very first time in the movie. It's a beaver! And it's everything to me. Like, it genuinely is everything. And Mrs. Beaver is the way she was so concerned about her sewing machine. It was so wholesome. It was so good. And honestly, Mr. Beaver was so good. And also just, can we talk about how domesticated the beavers were? Because I loved that. When she was like, put my shoe on. And he's like, yes, ma'am, I will. It's honestly so freaking wholesome. It's so freaking cute. Lucy was definitely obviously the highlight of this for me as far as the siblings go, because she really is the embodiment of kindness and understanding and sort of this openness to accept everybody regardless of what they look like, regardless of who they are. It's a very kind outlook into the world, right? And so I really like Lucy. And I mean, there's a lot of innocence in that. I think obviously she's very naive, like the fact that Mr. Tubnose just approached her and he's like, come, I've got tea and treats, and she's like, well, I'll stay only for a little bit. I'm like, girl, that's a whole ass kidnapper. He could be a murderer for all you know. And you're like, yes, sir, let's go get some tea. And so all of that aside, I loved Lucy. I think she was really, really great in this. So definitely one of the highlights. Nobody can convince me that Edmund is not a brat. He's a bully and a brat. And listen, I hope he gets better as the series goes along, especially with, you know, Edmund the Just and his development seemingly so going into adulthood and still ruling over Narnia, and how he is always very fair and his counsel is always very just phenomenal, and how his outlook on politics has always been so helpful. I do hope that he gets better, because as a kid, even Peter says so when he says, you see anything smaller than you and you always look to attack it. It's like you're always targeting things that you deem sort of unworthy or lesser than you. And we see that all the time with Lucy, and he does a lot of things out of spite. And so I can't wait to see that character development, hopefully with Edmund. Susan, nobody can convince me this girl is not a pagan, because I'm sorry, just the symbolism alone of when they are looking into the wardrobe for the very first time after hearing Lucy going into Narnia, the fact that she's the one that opens the wardrobe and she's the one that touches the back of it and she doesn't see anything beyond, I think says a lot about obviously her belief system and whether believing or not that this is a thing. She a pagan. I'm convincing myself that she's a pagan and I'm running with it. I don't think anybody could convince me otherwise, if I'm being honest. Also, we love Father Christmas in this, literally being a prime delivery. He said, Mrs. Beaver, I've got your sewing machine. Don't worry though, I'll get it delivered to your house. Don't have to worry about the I don't have to worry about carrying it around. Just doing what Jeff Bezos does wrong half the time. We really do love. This is one of my favorite quotes. It was on page 158, and this says, "I hope no one who reads this book has been quite as miserable as Susan and Lucy were that night. But if you have been, if you've been up all night and cried till you have no more tears left in you, you will know that there comes in the end a sort of quietness. You feel as if nothing was ever going to happen again. At any rate, that was how it felt to these two. Hours and hours seemed to go on by in this dead calm, and they hardly noticed that they were getting colder and colder." And then also at the very end, one of the last few pages, "So they lived in great joy, and if they ever remembered their life in this world, it was only as one remembers a dream." But I think one of the biggest things to talk about, first of all, and I think both important yet not as extensive as the main theme for this, there's obviously ableist language in this. There's also a lot of misogyny in this book, and I don't think it's unusual for the time frame that this was written in. This is no different than any of the other classics that were written around that time frame. For example, when Father Christmas gives Lucy and Susan the horn and the potion or the liquid that helps heal people, I don't know exactly what to brand it for, the fact that he gives them the weapons and he mentions, y'all are not gonna be going to war, y'all are not gonna fight. There was this mention about when women get into the war, it gets ugly, or like it gets worse, or it gets weird, or whatever the terminology was for that scene. And then obviously for the big thing are the religious undertones of Narnia, which I know that's a big driving point for people and why they no longer like Narnia. I know that's the reason why a lot of people have been unhauling it. I know there's even like Christian guides for Narnia, which is just like wild to me. I never knew that growing up, and so it's all very new information for me. We know Daddy Aslan is Jesus, like he's Jesus. He's supposed to be Jesus, and then his dad, who's the emperor, supposed to be God, and then obviously just the very, very obvious representation of Jadis, the White Witch, as a daughter of Lilith. And so it sort of drives this contrast between obviously her as the evil, not the ultimate evil, but part of the evil, and then Aslan, who is good, and he can choose not to be good. And here's the thing with the series, I will assume there's a lot to critique later on, but I think there's also obviously nuance to these conversations, and I think it's very interesting. As the resident pagan, I think it's very interesting the way that C.S. Lewis wrote Aslan. I like the distinction of who said anything about safe. Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And I think there is this distinction between being benevolent and being kind and being good versus being, you know, a safe option, totally good and always making like the right choices. And so I like the distinction of Aslan being described as good. Even things like this, "Now I kill you instead of him, as our pact was, and so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing him as well? And who will take him out of my hand then? Understand that you have given me Narnia forever. You have lost your own life and you have not saved his. In that knowledge, despair and die." And obviously, literally, just let's talk about it. Literally the stone table. C.S. Lewis really said, "I'ma rewrite the Bible, but Jeebus gonna be a lion." And everybody just went with it. But yeah, I think where I fall in with this is that the book was fun to read. Were there things I liked? Sure. Were there things I disliked? Sure. Were there things I laughed at just because they were honestly just so goofy? Absolutely yes. The battle scene literally was a page. Like that's how long it was. So those are my thoughts on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, methinks. And now it's time to get into Prince Caspian. Daddy Ben Barnes, is that you? So I've got updates for you guys. I have officially finished Prince Caspian, Mr. Crispin, and I did not like this. Almost out of spite, I want to rate this 1 star, though I know it's not. But the petty side of me, which doesn't often come up, wants to give this 1 star. I'm very inclined to do so. These are my thoughts, but I think I'm gonna go with a 2 star. So obviously in this one, we've got the Pevensey siblings out of Narnia now. In the first one, they left Narnia through the wardrobe once more after being adults and being long reigning kings and queens. And so this takes place a year after, and they are going to their respective boarding schools, except that they are suddenly snapped into Narnia. They don't really know why. And once they get in there, and this is the part that I did like about this, in the first book, we were promised that if any of the siblings were to ever think about Narnia, they would remember it as if it was a dream. And they indeed did. They walk into Narnia. They're like, oh yeah, we're here. Like, we're in Narnia. Except where the hell are we? Because like, we've never seen this island before. These ruins and this orchard, like we've never seen any of this. And slowly but surely, as they start putting the pieces together and they start seeing certain items, they go, oh wait, this is Cair Paravel. And this is the orchard that we put in, but like, why is it in this place? And why is it so destroyed? Like, how long has it been? We've only been gone for a year. And so as they remember all of these things, Susan is very much speaking as if she's like in a trance. It's like very much as if she were dreaming about something. It's literally, I think the best way to brand it is Once Upon a Dream. That's kind of what it feels like, where they know they've been here before and they know what they did while they were there, but they can't exactly pinpoint what they did or where they were, if that makes sense. It certainly delivers and something that we've previously already read. And I did really like how Edmund specifically started remembering things more clearly and very specific events, and mostly sort of his life as king and all of the things he did. And then they see this little boat out in the distance and they end up saving Trumpkin, who is another prominent character in Prince Caspian. He is a dwarf, and so they end up saving him. And because they saved him, they get acquainted. Obviously, all of the Pevensey siblings tell him, yeah, we're the kings and queens, what's up? And he's like, not to be offensive, not to be insensitive, but like, y'all are kids. This is not what we were promised. And so he starts telling the tale of King Caspian. And so at the start of the book, and that is something also that I liked, is the fact that we start out the book and Caspian is already in his camp with the creatures, and he is already building this sort of establishment, I guess you could say, where he wants to bring Narnia back to the amazing thing it once was, and he really wants to dethrone his uncle. I always forget, I'm trying to remember the pronunciation from the movie. Is it Myras or Miras? I can't really remember how to pronounce his name, but essentially, he is an usurper, and so they want to get him out. And so we go back into the past as Trumpkin is telling the story of Caspian. That part was also very, very interesting. We get to see his life with his uncle and how he was told nurseries about Narnia, about old Narnia, we should say, because Narnia no longer exists in the same way that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Instead, it's probably been either hundreds or thousands of years since the siblings were last there, which makes a lot of sense, because if when they went in, time didn't move when they left, and they were there for children, teenager, and adult years, then what does that mean for when a year goes by? Like, it's a really long time. And so he gets tales of old Narnia and how animals used to talk and the trees used to walk and talk as well, how Aslan was always there and he was always the sort of savior, and how he was everybody's guide and he was this sort of kingly, otherworldly creature. And so Caspian gets all of these stories, but when his uncle finds out, his uncle's like, fuck that, you don't need stories about old Narnia. And so he fires the nurse. He hires Dr. Cornelius. Cornelius does have magic, though he doesn't disclose that, obviously, for safety reasons. And he ends up feeding into the whole, let me tell Mr. Caspian, Mr. Crispin, about old Narnia, the creatures, and sort of this lore behind this magical country, and how his uncle, as an usurper, has also been trying to drive away the belief of old Narnia. He doesn't want people to believe that there were talking animals. He doesn't want people to believe in Aslan. And so he is very much in that regard. I don't know if you can call him a pagan or what, given the religious context of Narnia and Aslan and all of these magical things. He's doing all of these things. And then one day, obviously, obviously the king has his baby, his son, and then they want to kill Crispin. And so he runs away in his horse, and that's where he meets all of these creatures. Turns out the horse also betrays them, and so it's a whole thing. Anyway, at the time that Trumpkin is done with the story, we snap back into present time, and we find out that the reason why the Pevensys are there is because Mr. Crispin blew the horn, much like we see in the movie, Daddy Ben Barnes, bless. And so we get the explanation, and suddenly these two storylines converge into a single one. And that is where the story becomes uninteresting, because while Caspian's backstory and the arrival of the Pevensys back in Narnia is very interesting, I very much enjoyed it, I find that the journey to get to Caspian and then going into the duel and then the aftermath of the door, which my theory is that that door is the door to heaven, and I don't think that is the last we'll see of that damn door, but my theory is that it's the door to heaven in some way, shape, or form. I find that all of that was uninteresting, and I think there's also this big point where, much like the first book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the story is somewhat interesting. In this one, I found it was much more stagnant. Nothing really much was happening. It was much more about the backstory of Caspian, the lore and the history behind the Telmarines, and then obviously the arrival of the Pevensys. Beyond that, like, nothing really was happening. Aslan gets there, and suddenly everything is good and dandy again. And so it really keeps driving up this point of y'all can really do nothing, because the only person who will make sure that everything is righted is Aslan, because he's Jeebus. I also find that there's this dichotomy that this book presents where when Narnia has magic, it is this beautiful, magical, whimsical, stunning, happy place, right? Then when it doesn't have magic, it's this very dreary, sad, unimpressive, almost unhappy place. And so I like that side of it, but do I think that it is as interesting or as poetic or as, I don't know, good and great as Mr. Lewis intended it to be? I don't think it is. And so I think in that regard, that presentation works against this book. There is something interesting though in this book about having to believe in something that you can't necessarily see. And it works both for the Telmarines and Caspian and all of these animals who can talk, and then also with the Pevensys. With them coming back, we see them kind of struggle to see Aslan in the same way that Lucy can. And it's because Lucy never stops believing, right? Like, Lucy believes in this place. She believes in Aslan so much that she is always the first one to see him. She is always the first one to enter. Whereas the other Pevensys are like, Lucy, what the fuck are you talking about? And so I find that super interesting, because it's the same way with Caspian. Like, Caspian, despite everybody telling him that old Narnia is not real, animals who talk aren't real, Aslan isn't real, he's like, but I believe it, so it must be true in some capacity. If there are stories, then it must be true. It's not that I have to see it to believe it, but why are there stories if this is not true in some capacity? And so in that regard, again, very biblical, like, we know this, it's gonna be a thing throughout the series. And now it is time for The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, that I've also heard is super different to the movie. I can't remember a single thing about the movie, if I'm being honest. I watched that so long ago. I think I just watched it once when it came out, and that was it. So I don't remember anything beyond a boat, Ben Barnes, Will Poulter, Lucy, and Edmund, whatever their names in real life are. And oh my god, I didn't talk about the little mouse. Richie Cheep. He was very cute. As always, he was also really cute in the movie. So 10 out of 10. When he got his tail, made me equally as happy as it did in the movie. Really good. Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Let's go. No time to waste. Let's get into it. Not, and he almost deserves it.
I think that's a great first line.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's nasty.
That is so horrible. I love how Edmund says, they couldn't in our days. I'm like, sir, you're like 5, calm down.
Like living forever, because then they could live to an old age in Narnia, return to the real world, and then live adult being back to being children. I'm a bit iffy on the how time works and stuff.
Yeah, I don't even think Clive knows. Hello friends, hi. So, I have finished Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and how do I express my extreme dislike for this book? I honestly did not have a good time. I just have an extreme dislike for books set at sea, books with ships. I can watch it on my screen, but for some reason in books, I just don't like it. I don't find it to be very interesting. I think at the end of the day, Voyage of the Dawn Treader really does feel like a collection of short stories where, yes, it's leading to an ultimate end. When you're reading it, it's like there's such a disconnect from one to the other. So in this one, we've got still the Pevensey siblings. However, we've got half of them. We've got Lucy and Edmund. Peter is out of the picture in this one, and then Susan is over with their relatives in the US. Got Lucy and Edmund plus their cousin Eustace, and them going back to Narnia through a portrait, a painting that is in a room. And so they literally go to Narnia through this painting, and they literally land in the water, and so they have to swim all the way over to the Dawn Treader, which is the very first ship that Narnia has seen in years. It was built by Caspian, and they are currently treading their way, trying to find 7 Narnian lords that were banished from Narnia by his uncle. Caspian ends up abolishing slavery, and a big thing in this book is really that it's shunning the idea of slavery. Even when we see Cassian's ship, we see a ship that is very unlike the norm. Typically, when you look at the idea of a ship, people would not be treated equally, and so Mr. Clive makes it a big point in this book that the Dawn Treader is unlike any other ship out there. People are treated equally, they take turns, there is loads of food and drink under the deck, and so we see Caspian telling these people how being a beggar is better than being a slave. Listen, it is quite a lot, and honestly, this book is like so uneventful for me. Like, there are really very few moments that I like about this book. Reapy Cheap honestly takes the cake on this one because I still continue to like him and to really like where his story went and sort of the significance of his storyline, where he really is sort of battling between fate and choice, especially since he has a prophecy that says that once he reaches and tastes the sweet water, then things will take a turn and he will be able to reach the end of the world in Aslan's country. Again, that battle between fate and choice, which is something that we see from Caspian as well at the end of the book, and it sort of has this inevitability factor to it where you can't really fight fate despite the choices you make. Sometimes you have the ability to make a choice, but at the end of the day, you will end up exactly where you need to be. And so that's kind of it for Caspian too, where he decides that he is going to Aslan's country, to the end of the world, with Reapy Cheap too, and then everybody talks him out of it because he can't go. And then Aslan also presents himself to Caspian and says, you're not supposed to be there, you're not supposed to go, so you're staying and you're going back to Narnia. He ends up marrying Ramandu's daughter and going back, and then they have kids and grandkids, and it's just the line continues and they keep reigning. And it seems like at the end of the book, based on how it's written, I don't think we're gonna see Caspian again. I'm not sure if we will. So in that regard, that part was interesting. Also, it seems like a big theme of this book is that the older you grow, the more tempted you are to sin. I don't know how wrong or right that is as part of the themes of this book goes, but it did seem like a big thing, especially with Eustace being a little brat, because he was kind of funny, I'm not gonna lie. But with him seeing this treasure after the dragon dies and wanting to take all of these riches for himself, and so he was being very selfish, he was being very greedy, and so as he takes them, he turns into this dragon, and through being a dragon, he realizes that what he's been doing, how he's been behaving, and the decisions he's been making are not the right way to go around life. And so he sort of learns from his mistakes in a way, although he still is like on and off a brat, and he tries shedding off that dragon skin, and he starts trying to wash away his sins. And then Aslan shows up, and Aslan's like, let me undress you. And I was like, whoa, sir? It's just, listen, I'm sure it's not meant to be creepy, but the way it's written is creepy. And so Aslan's like, let me undress you, and then let me dress you. And so it's almost like, let me shed this old skin of yours and let me turn you into a Christian. Like, listen, it's quite a lot. This book is quite a lot. All mistakes rectified. All is good. I was like, I guess, let's go. And then also with Lucy seeing the magician's book and wanting to perform the spell to become more beautiful because she feels like she is in the sort of competition with Susan and she really wants to out-beautify her, and then she doesn't because Aslan stops her and he's like, you shall not do this. So there was also that, and then her also just listening to that conversation with her friends talking about her and her wanting to know what they say. And so there's almost this reaffirmation of what book 2 already shows us, which is like, sometimes you just have to believe that people are good. Sometimes you just have to believe that these are going to be good friends. You can't have the answer to everything. You can't see everything. You can't know how things are going to pan out. Like, that's just, it's not the way things work. I feel like out of all of them so far, this really does feel the more blatantly religious in terms of its allegories. I don't think it's trying to be as subtle as the other ones. Like, this one is just very in your face, because even beyond that, there's a point where Aslan literally tells Lucy, because Lucy's like, I will never see you again. Because also I find it interesting that now Lucy and Edmund can't go back to Narnia because Aslan's like, you children are too old now, which makes me wonder exactly why that is. Like, I hope it gets explained at some point, though it doesn't. I don't know if it will, but she asks him, she's like, I won't ever see you again. And he's like, oh, but you can see me at all times. Like, you can see me even in your world. And she's like, can I? And he's like, oh yeah, I got a name in your world. It's just a matter of you finding out what that is, sir. Just say that you're Debus. Clive, what are we gonna do with you, Clive? Okay, so my camera rudely caught me off and none of my batteries have batteries, even though I have several. It's honestly a disgrace. What I was gonna say is that beyond Reapy Cheap and Eustace, really the most interesting things I found in this book were, first of all, the water turning things into gold. I thought that scene was really cool. And then also the scene of the Sweetwater, I also thought that was really nice. And then the mermaids, I thought that was really cool too. However, I just hate how C.S. Lewis presented that, how Mr. Clive just kept saying like, those people are not good. I was like, what do you mean those people? Like, I know you mean another species, but like, I don't like the phrasing of those people. Historically, it's just not a very good way to phrase things. So I think that's my experience with Dawn Treader. Honestly, I was expecting a lot more from this, but alas, it was not very exciting for me personally. We stand Caspian not being a flat earther. Is all over the place. How is this so all over the place? Bless up, Clive. Let me not speak ill of the dead. Love you the most. This series is just like so inconsistent. It's like unreal to me. This I gave 2.5 stars to. Definitely better than Dawn Treader, but not by a lot. I definitely think it was easier to read. It didn't drag out as much as Dawn Treader, though I do still feel like these past few books, Caspian, Dawn Treader, this one, are honestly just a little bit longer than they need to be, and I find that they drag out just a little bit too much. Honestly, this being 243 pages, like this book could have easily been 200 pages. It reaches a certain point where you're like, it's done. And there's still 60 more pages to go. Oh, it's done. It's still got 40 more pages to go. So in this one, we've got the return of Eustace to Narnia. This is his second time going to Narnia. And this time around, he goes with Jill. Jill is a new character that we have never met before. However, they both return, and Aslan gives Jill in particular a mission that together they must complete and solve. Now, I was wrong in my prediction. Prince Caspian actually does feature in this book. Obviously, not very prominently, but he is in here. And we have in particular Prince Caspian's son, Prince Rilian. Well, now he's not Prince Caspian, now he's King Caspian. So Prince Rilian. And he went missing 10 years ago. He went missing because a witch, a lady in green, literally just Miss Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West. Hello. This definitely gave me Wizard of Oz / Alice in Wonderland vibes, not gonna lie. And so I think in that regard, that part was enjoyable. So this witch just snatches up Rilian and then nobody ever sees him again. And so Aslan basically tells Jill, like, it's your job to find Rilian and to follow the signs. Don't care what else manifests into your life, what else you see. Things can be misleading. Literally follow the signs. And so a big part of this book is literally what happens if you don't follow the signs. So if the signs are quote unquote obvious or not, but they present themselves to you, if you don't follow them, then there's consequences, right? And there's a lot of things that will present themselves as a sign, but they're not, and they they can be misleading. There can be evil or bad dressed up as the truth or as good. And so obviously they're kids. They're gonna see the signs and not think twice about them. So literally one of the signs is that Caspian is supposed to help them on this journey. So they literally see old Caspian and they're like, that's not him. Caspian's not around. And so literally their very first sign, their very first clue, they completely ignore. And so out they go. They literally see the witch too with a knight. And I'm like, that knight has to be Rillian. And turns out he was bound to the silver chair. And as long as he was bound to the silver chair, could not remember a single thing about his past. However, they see the witch and they're like, oh, she's so pretty and she's wearing green and that she's so good. And they were told that the witch was dressed in green. And they literally go, so pretty, so kind, so amazing. So they were fooled by the pretty, kind appearance of the witch when she is actually just a wicked, evil witch. Then they also see the giants, which they think are super gentle and super kind giants. And then the giants are like, let me eat you for dinner. And then they see the gnomes and they think that the gnomes are bad, but then turns out that the gnomes are good. This comes closer to the feeling of the first book. Things I liked in this book, Puddleglum, I definitely liked him a lot. There was a certain sort of irony and comedy, but seriousness at the same time about his dry sense of humor, about his pessimism. Also the owl, now I can't remember the owl's name, but the owl was like very at the beginning. Glimfeather. I also very much liked Glimfeather. So that's the owl that helps them once they don't seek Caspian's help because they missed the first sign. So Glimfeather ends up helping them. So Glimfeather was great. We saw Parliament of Owls. It was fantastic. I would say those are really like two of my favorite things in this book. Jill was okay. I definitely didn't mind her. I found it very interesting how, depending on where the story was going, she kept repeating herself the signs every single night so she wouldn't forget them because it was Aslan's order. And so after a while, she started repeating the signs to herself at night, and so she kept forgetting them up until she forgot them completely. She even got signs trying to remind her of what the signs were. She would completely forget them, and then when she'd see them manifested like physically, she'd be like, oh, I dreamt about that. Doesn't mean anything though. And so I found that part to be really interesting. I also found really curious how Jill just like immediately believes Aslan, immediately believes in Aslan. It was like an instant sort of like connection there, but honestly, Aslan's a fucking brat. Like, I'm sorry. You cannot convince me that Aslan's not a brat. This entire book, and I mean, for that matter, Dawn Treader too, whenever anything didn't go his way, Mr. Mance got so angry and he was like, no. And then he just blew on people's face and I'm like, that breath's stinky. Like, I just know that breath is a rank. We love the breath of life. We appreciate it, but also like, stop. Because the way this is written, and I know it's not supposed to be creepy or anything. Yeah, you blew her quicker than you blew me. I was like, I'm sorry. I will also say one of the biggest things that really bothers me about these last few books, particularly Dawn Treader and Silver Chair, the ableist language, and I know it's something of the time, and so let me get that very clear. Like, it's not something that's sort of avoidable. Literally every book that was written in this time period, at least once or twice, will contain ableist language just because there wasn't the attention to the sensitivity of that in that time. It's so annoying. I cannot even begin to explain it to you guys because it's a lot. It's like every other page there's one. Aslan, Daddy Aslan, please save me from Mr. Clive. Anyways, that being said, I thought it was finally time to read the book that I am most interested in, which is The Magician's Nephew, only to find out that I'm wrong. And actually the book I'm meant to be reading next is the racist one, which I'm definitely not looking forward to. So I guess it's time for me to start The Horse and His Boy. It's boy, The Horse and His Boy. This is a scream and cry for help. Let's talk about this. I really just want to give this book like the Rosalia side. That's me right now because this, 1 star, okay? No regrets, though every regret at the same time, and much to discuss because this book was a lot. It really was a lot. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it got worse, didn't really know what to expect, it was really bad. And so we're going to talk about it because I really feel there is no way to ignore the Orientalism in this book and also the racial insensitivity, which at the end of the day is a product of its time, but it's my time now, so I get to critique it. And I will take a wild guess here and say this is probably also a fan favorite because it has a lot going for it. When you look at the core elements of this novel, it could potentially be interesting. We don't follow any of the Pevensey siblings as the main characters. It is set in a completely different area of this world, so we're not in Narnia either. The culture of the Calormen, which is the main culture we see in here, is completely different. First of all, it really is a product of its time with the racial insensitivity in here, with the colorism, with the racial bias. Like, it really is strong, it's very prominent, and it's a lot. But it also plays into this area of writing and media in general, because we see it in movies too, where a lot of writers, a lot of authors utilize people of color or different cultures because they think it's exotic enough, and then they fall into really harmful stereotypes, so it ends up being a part of tokenism, and it's just bad all around. So in this book we follow Shasta, who for the entirety of the audiobook, I swear the narrator kept saying Chester. However, we follow Shasta, and Shasta lives with his father. They live a fisherman's life, and one day his father is approached by this man to buy Shasta off of him. Shasta ends up finding out that he is not actually his father's son. In fact, he is adopted. And then he is approached by Anredin, who is the man who's trying to buy him, his horse, who talks. The horse's name is Bree, and we obviously know that because he talks, he is Narnian. And he proposes to Shasta, hey, let's run away. You don't want to be sold. It's not going to be a nice life. I hate my life, so let's just run away together and hope for the best. Let's go to Narnia. And he goes, bet, let's go. And so they run away, and while they're on the road, they end up meeting Aravis. Aravis is also running away from home from Calormen. Calormen is the southern part of the hemisphere that we have never seen before, and she was in an arranged marriage, and so she didn't want to partake. She runs away. The whole reason why she runs away is because she wants to take her own life. So she tries the first time, she doesn't do it. She tries a second time, she is stopped by her horse, who also talks. We also find out this horse is Narnian. And so these two people meet, and on we trek. And then these two get separated because Shasta ends up running into the Pevensies, and he overhears them talking about how there's one man, Rabadesh, who really wants to marry Susan. Susan does not want to do it. She doesn't want any part of it. And then they end up mistaking him for Prince Corin, who is a prince of Archenland, and so he ends up pretending that he is in fact this prince so that he can go with the Pevensies. Aravis ends up going to a completely different place, and she ends up going to a friend. And while she is with this friend, she overhears Rabadesh saying, listen, I will take Susan as a wife, whatever it takes. And so even if that means storming Narnia with soldiers and war, I will do it. And so Aslan is basically like, run, run, bitches, I'm coming for you. And so he scares them into going to Archenland faster. Shasta warns them of this whole thing. They fight, things happen. Rabadesh gets turned into a donkey, which is basically a whole reflection into pride, wisdom, and humility, where if you're prideful, you will be punished and you will see the consequences of it repeatedly. But if you are humble and wise, then you will be rewarded for that humility. And so that's kind of the biggest part of this book, because even Aravis suffers at the hands of that, which I did not agree with in the slightest. We'll get into that in a little bit. Then he gets turned into a donkey, and they actually figure out that Shasta is not Corin. He is his twin brother, Cor. And so he ends up marrying Aravis. Happily ever after, they have a son, he becomes king, yada, yada, yada. My biggest issue with this book is the colorism, racial insensitivity, racial bias, the Orientalism. Let's talk about it. This book makes it a point several times to point out how the Calormen, which, by the way, most unoriginal name you could find, calor, as in heat in Spanish. Mr. Clive Stamps really said, how much can I play up the fact that they're from a desert country? The Calormen are oftentimes described as cruel ancient people who are often synonymous to evil and just really, really bad things. Whereas the Narnians and the Archenlands are all described as very cheery and happy and welcoming, and they're walking down the streets and they're laughing and they're just really cheery people. So right off the bat, we get this comparison that brown-skinned people, the POCs in this, are aggressive and they're angry and they're evil and they're not merciful. And we cannot let Queen Susan or anybody for that matter fall into the hands of the Calormen. But then people from Archenland and the people from Narnia who are all white, then these people are good and cheery and they're just wholly embodying everything good in the world. I fucking hated that. There's also one part where they call Calormen savages. And not only that, but the two characters that are heavily punished in this book are both from the Calormian Empire. Aravis, who literally Aslan just comes in and he scratches her back because he tells her, you will have to live, you have to experience for yourself what your stepmother's slaves go through. The audacity of this lion is all I'm gonna say. Actually, the audacity of Clive Stamps to say that with his whole chest. And then Rapidash, who gets turned into a donkey. Anytime you try and leave 10 miles from your country, you will turn into a donkey again so that you will never stop learning your lesson. And that's not to say that other characters in his book haven't been evil. We've seen examples of evil white characters in his book. So let's not get it twisted here. But why are we making it a point in one entire book to just highlight an entire culture and all of the reasons why it's bad? Not only the stereotypes of people's personalities, but how the culture itself is flawed and it's not good in the way that Narnians are good. It's that comparison game that makes it all the worse. And I just have to say, justice for Aravis, like I really can't believe a child, because we don't know her age, but we can assume she's probably around the same age as like Eustace and Jill. Probably like what, between like 10 and like 14 maybe? A child was literally clawed. Her back was clawed off because she ran away. Somebody save me. Honestly, I hated every second of this. This was a 1 star. I just can't believe how much emphasis Clive Stamps put into how people wearing turbans and how people living in the desert were so dirty and evil, and just why are we using all of those synonyms? And again, it's a product of its time, but that doesn't mean I should ignore all of those things and like it. I can't look past it. As somebody who is half Lebanese, my ancestors are quaking. I don't know if I should cry or laugh. Anyways, 1 star for this trash. Fucking hated every second of it. So what I am going to say is we're walking into the Magician's Nephew, and if this is not good, listen. I don't even know what to do anymore. We're gonna finish the series today because I will not lose an ounce more of my sanity for Clive Stamps Lewis. I won't do it. The Magician's Nephew was a vibe. We actually have a good one for once. Thank goodness. Read it literally in 1 sitting, just plowed through it, and it was so good. I'm giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Now this is the moment I've been waiting for all a fucking long. Oh my god. So in this one we've got the creation of Narnia. However, it happens in a really interesting way because the professor that we see in the first book, Professor Kirk, is actually the main character in the story, which is Diggory. He was an asshole, mind you. He was an absolute asshole to Polly, and it's the sexist and misogynistic nature to this man. Listen, it was a lot. However, putting that aside, this book was very, very interesting. So Polly and Diggory meet during the summer, and these two embark on little adventures together up until one day they realize that Uncle Andrew, and what is it with creepy Uncle Andrews, if you get what I mean? It's sort of eerie in terms of its accuracy in terms of our real life, real time. However, Uncle Andrew is a magician. He dabbles in magic, though he really doesn't understand magic. He thinks he does and that he's got it all sorts of figured out, when in reality we see when the kids use the rings that he made, which are technically the rings that take them to the wood in between worlds that eventually becomes Narnia, he doesn't understand what he did with those rings. And so the term magician is used very, very loosely because magic is all but a concept, right? Like, he really doesn't know what he is doing. And so essentially Uncle Uncle Andrew just yeets Polly into the wood between worlds, and he's been experimenting with animals, but he's never really done it with a human being, so he doesn't even know if it works or it doesn't. Lo and behold, it does. Diggory goes after Polly to rescue her, and as they are trekking the wood between worlds, they realize that by stepping into ponds, they can go into other worlds. And once they do, they find this world where there is a sort of row of frozen royals. They're sort of statues, and there is a stone that says, "If you dare, clankety clank clank this hammer." And Diggory does it after being very sexist to Polly, by the way. Like, this man just goes in on her, and poor Polly puts up with all of it. I would have literally knocked a few on this man's face, on this little kid's face, if I was his age. He rings it, and Jadis, the witch, wakes up. She explains that she went out for battle with her sister, and her sister didn't realize how powerful Jadis was, and so she ended up taking over the world, but now she was frozen. Now that she's unfrozen, she wants to conquer London, which is just hilarious. She's literally astride a cab, and she's like, "I will conquer London." However, that scene, again, I feel like everything good with Mr. Lewis's books comes with a downside, and that scene was very heavy in terms of what she was doing to the horse, that Strawberry, which later becomes Fledge, which is the first sort of Pegasus, I guess you could say. And that scene was very heavy. It went into very heavy detail as to how cruel she was being to the horse, so that was like the only thing that I was just like, see, it was funny up until she started doing all of that, but she literally rips off the lamppost, and that's why the lamppost is in Narnia, because she tries to literally kill Aslan with it. However, she tries to conquer London. She doesn't succeed. They go back to the wood in between worlds. She is like going all out on Uncle Andrew, which I absolutely loved. She was like, "You useless man." I was like, tell him, Jadis, tell him. Honestly, loved Jadis in this one, and also loved hearing her backstory and sort of her motif for being the way that she was. She really sees power as something that is all-consuming, and if she has it, then why doesn't she use it? And if she conquers, then she will do everything and anything to get there. It's like she doesn't see any limitations in terms of morale. She really doesn't see sort of these boundaries of like good and evil. She just sees what she thinks she needs to do or what she wants to do, and she just goes for it. She doesn't care about who'll get hurt or what'll happen in the middle ground. She's like, I have magic, I'm strong, I can do it, then why the fuck not? And you know what? It's kind of messed up, but I was here for it. And so I think in terms of her character construction, I think she was really, really interesting, and it definitely gave her a lot more depth than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so lo and behold, they go back to the wood in between world, and they see Aslan, and Aslan starts singing. And so with his singing, with his voice, becomes the creation of Narnia. And so Narnia comes to be. He brings the trees to life, he gives all of the animals voices, and he calls upon all of these mystical creatures to come forth and be a part of Narnia and to bow down to him. And as Jadis is observing all of this happen, which is also so interesting to me, because it seems like it fuels that hatred that she has for Aslan, where she sees him being so all-powerful, so almighty, where she's like, I don't like how powerful he is. I don't like that he's more powerful than me. And so it starts fueling this need of hers to defeat him and end him at all costs, which I, again, find so very interesting. So he creates Narnia. There's some ableist language that I absolutely hated, and it was coming from Aslan. We do not stand Jibu's being ableist. There's definitely a lot of religious allegory in here. I mean, just in and out of itself, the creation of Narnia is a big thing. But we also see Aslan send Diggory out into this garden to fetch a magic apple. When he goes there, we also see that Jadis, she ate one of the apples, and that is why she is immortal, and that is why she has lived for so long at the start of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is also so interesting because I genuinely thought she was just like immortal for the sake of being immortal, but it's because she ate the forbidden fruit. And I also like the fact that when Aslan was explaining it, he's like, I mean, you can eat the apple, like nothing will stop you from eating it if you really, really want to do it, but you have to deal with the consequences afterwards, and it can give you what you want, whether that's immortality or healing, but what comes after, you're gonna have to deal with it. And I also found that part really interesting. Essentially, whatever, Diggory comes back with the apple, the Garden of Eden. It's very obvious. We obviously see the first temptation with Diggory wanting to steal the apple without Aslan's permission and wanting to either eat it for himself or take it to his mom, who is very, very ill. And quite honestly, I feel like the highlight of this book for me really was Jadis, and seeing her and her character and her personality, and seeing her really believe that she is above the law, like she does not want to abide to a single thing. So it's obviously this contrast between good and evil and the nuances of it, right? And so I quite liked this. It was quite interesting. It was definitely such a massive 180 from the past few books in the series. So I liked this, and I also liked how it felt very much like a fairy tale in the way that it's written. Felt very, very whimsical. And so we see after the fact how that very first story of Diggory and Polly and the creation of Narnia eventually leads to the Pevensies coming in and doing their thing and fulfilling this prophecy, destiny, whatever it is. The best book so far, to be quite honest. And now it's time for the last battle. I am so glad this is over, and I would say I can't even begin to explain it to you, but I don't think I have to, because this vlog was so all over the place. I edited all of it already, and I made it a point to edit everything before I even filmed my update clip for this, just because I wanted to gauge time, and also just because I needed to get my thoughts together on this. And despite it being a full 24 hours since I finished this book, I still don't have my thoughts together about this one. I think it's very interesting in terms of the commentary it provides. However, it doesn't come without its disadvantages, and it doesn't come without its problems. And I think problems is a better word to use in this case. Again, we stumble upon the same issue that we had in The Horse and His Boy, where the Kalor men are synonymous to evil and to reaping destruction and all the bad in the world. Even the correlation of Tash, who is the god they worship, or the main deity they worship, also being what people think will bring forth the end of the world. It all together is encapsulated in a very negative light, and so I definitely didn't like that as an extension of The Horse and His Boy. So in this book, it is no different than that one, but it's worse in that regard too, because there are literal slurs in this one, which I was not expecting in a children's book. However, it seems like children's books are not exempt from derogatory terms either, so that was very jarring to read and just very unexpected, and I was disgusted at the rapid fire nature the slurs were happening at times, because it was just one after the other after the other. And it seems like Clive was trying to make it a big point to alienate people of color in this book, and I hated every second of it. I just didn't like it at all. And so much as expected, this book is modeled after the apocalypse, and I do think there's something interesting to be said about reading the series in publication order, because you will read about the creation of Narnia and the Magician's Nephew, and that will be directly followed by reading about the destruction of Narnia and the end of its days, which I think is a nice juxtaposition. I think it's the duality of life and everything that just, you know, it was really interesting. And the way that the book presents like the ultimate big bad was also really interesting, and it was unexpected. And so the book starts out and we've got a donkey named Puzzle, and we've got a super old ape called Shift. Now these two characters meet, and Shift essentially convinces Puzzle to believe everything he says and to do his entire bidding. So this ape really said, "Gaslight gatekeep the shit out of this donkey," and it was just a whole fucking lot. Something literally falls into Cauldron Pool, which is where the beginning of the book is set in, and once Shift commands Puzzle to take it out, he realizes that it is a lion skin. He convinces Puzzle, or tries to at first, to believe that this lion skin was sent by Aslan for Puzzle to wear in order to make people believe that this is like the second coming of Aslan. And Puzzle doesn't think it's very right, so I will give him props to sort of sniffing out the bullshit at first, but it doesn't last very long because Shift makes some alterations to this lion skin, and then he convinces Puzzle to wear it and essentially says, "What does a donkey know about signs?" Which is sort of full circle from the Silver Chair, which is all about following the signs, seeing the signs, and what essentially comes of ignoring the signs or following false truths or false goods. And so in terms of setup, it sets up the book incredibly well because it is the coming of the Antichrist. And I also think there's something incredibly fascinating about the commentary with the Antichrist and everybody believing that Tash as a deity, believing that that's going to be the big bad. The commentary on sometimes a deity or a god itself can be 10 times more merciful than that deity or god's creation itself. And so with Shift, we really see this really terrible evil figure is much worse than anything we've seen before. And so I think that sort of commentary and story construction is super intriguing to me. I genuinely really liked how it was presented into the story, and listen, he really gaslit and gatekept everything. At one point he said that Aslan and Tash were one and the same, which I mean, again, there is a duality to that, like good and evil are two sides of the same coin. And so how far-fetched is it to claim that creation and destruction or life and death are not the same thing or are from the same thing? And so he starts calling himself Aslan, which is just, it's hilarious. The book really kicks off afterwards with our current king of Narnia, King Tyrion, who is, I think, 8 times removed from King Caspian. And so he's just chilling with his unicorn Jewel, which bless Jewel, absolutely loved him. Jewel, honestly, one of the best parts of this book. It made me really emotional to read about their sort of goodbye and Jewel refusing to leave and saying, if you're going, I'm going with you, and there is no separation here because you are my master and I love you so much, like I can't leave you. And so that friendship in and out of itself was really beautiful to see and witness and read about. And so he is basically approached by a centaur, and as you know, centaurs in mythology are really known for stargazing and reading the stars and sort of reading the signs. And so basically Runewit, the centaur, tells him, I see something really bad coming. It's not gonna be very good. And then there's a dryad who comes in and it's claiming that all of the Calormen are cutting the trees and killing them all because of Aslan's orders. So Shift is over there just causing all the fucking mayhem in the world, and everybody is believing that he is Tashlin. Like, he is one and the same. They are just one embodiment, and it's crazy. Like, it's very chaotic. Eventually also Tyrion is in this very dreamlike state. He is literally asleep and dreaming, and he sees the Pevensies, specifically everybody but Susan, because Susan's not around because she doesn't believe in Narnia anymore. So I guess fuck Susan. And so he sees all of them around a dinner table. They're drinking wine, they're eating, they're doing all the things. And then Peter sort of goes, hey, I'm High King Peter, High King of Narnia, and Jill and Eustace come to Narnia. They're there, they do the thing, they follow Tyrion, help Tyrion. Tash makes an appearance. I thought he was gonna just end everybody on sight, but then everybody shows up and they're like, be gone, Tash. And Tash's like, I'm just skedaddle, like, it's fine. I got no business here. More things happen that I couldn't care less about, and then the apocalypse happens. Literally, Aslan gets there. He calls Father Time. Father Time just makes shooting stars appear from the sky, and it's like a whole show out of it. And then a giant plucks the sun from the sky and then just goes bloop, and then water just engulfs all of Narnia. Narnia is no more. Like, it literally, let me just look for the illustration. Literally this, it just ceases to exist because there's a whole ass tsunami, and they find a door in a shed, and turns out this is the same door that we saw in Caspian, which my theory was correct. It was the door to what C.S. Lewis modeled to be heaven, which is Aslan's country, which is the true Narnia. And so basically everybody who is worthy makes it through the door, and obviously all of the friends of Narnia, so all of the characters that we've seen in all of these books, make it through the door. Miss Susan is just over there chilling in London, so she doesn't know any of this is happening. She's lost all her siblings because lo and behold, they cross the door and then they go, oh, this feels kind of weird, and Aslan's like, yeah, by the way, you kind of died in a railway accident, so now you're dead in your world too, but welcome to Narnia. And I just some people will argue that Susan was not done dirty. I would argue that Susan got done dirty. Yes and no at the same time, because honestly, she's been liberated from the burden of interacting with Aslan, because if that was who I had to follow through the door, I would not do it. I think he's absolutely fucking terrible. The amount of things he did to all of these kids that were downright violent it was honestly fucking terrible in my opinion, and so we do not stand Aslan in this household. I thought Daddy Aslan was going to be fine, but Daddy Aslan, honestly, at the end of it all, could not fucking care less, and I have probably never despised a fictional character more than I do this fucking lion. Like, I just, damn, I didn't expect it to go that way. And so that was the last battle. I think there were interesting parts to this, as well as parts that were uninteresting, things that dragged out. I think, like every other Narnia book, it was just a little all over the place. I think the themes of misogyny and sexism and, again, colorism, orientalism were still very much present in this, even down to Susan not making it to Narnia because she is so grown up now and she is so mature and she only cares about nylon and makeup. And also the main thing is just the fact that she doesn't believe in Narnia anymore, and honestly cannot blame her, my pagan queen. Susan, we stand Susan. Stand Susan and Jadis for clear skin. Honestly, that is about the end of it all. And I am giving this 2 stars ultimately because it was. So at the end of it all, if I had to give a ranking for the Chronicles of Narnia, I think this would be my final order. I don't even know if you can see it. At the very bottom, we've got The Horse and His Boy, to nobody's surprise. This was just absolute garbage. Then we've got The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. The Last Battle is third to last, followed by Prince Caspian. And then for my top 3 books, we've got The Silver Chair at number 3, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe at number 2, and The Magician's Nephew at number 1. This was honestly such a roller coaster, and mind you, I had fun doing this. There were parts that were more fun than others. However, as an overall experience, it was fun. It was highly experimental, probably one of the most experimental experiments I've ever done. And so I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Give this video a thumbs up down below and comment down below, have you read Narnia? What are your thoughts? What is your least favorite book? What is your favorite book? Who's your favorite character, if you have any? I think there is many a thing to discuss here, and I honestly could have said more about each of the books. I just didn't want this to be too long for 7 books, and it's still gonna be probably like an hour-long video. However, we made it to the very end and I'm so fucking excited about it. If you reach the very end of the video, I don't want you to leave a lion emoji because honestly, I fucking hate Aslan. So instead, let's leave a witch emoji. And don't forget to subscribe down below. I am constantly uploading videos and I am sure you do not want to miss. And if you want to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon. It is always linked down below. And over there, you'll be able to find a bunch of exclusive videos, early access, videos without ads. You'll get exclusive live shows or reading sprints, 2 book clubs. You'll get readathons, a Discord server, and the whole 9 yards. So if you do want to join, that is always linked down below alongside all of my socials. And yes, I love you guys so much. I'm glad this is over, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye, everybody.